It's not just another parenting book. We'll get the gist of it with Dr. Tim Johanson up next. Welcome to the CHA Connect podcast. Today is a day that we have been looking for such a long time. I am joined today with a live audience of parents who are here to see Dr. Tim Johanson. Over the course of the many years I have been in this role at Chapel Hill, I have been working with parents in many scenarios, looking for some ideas to help their children, to help their families grow. And one of the books that I recommend is the book called GIST, The Essence of Raising Life-Ready Children. And so we are blessed with the co-author of GIST today, Dr. Tim Johanson. Welcome.
Thank you, Cassie. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. I would like to kick this off with hearing more about you, your background, and how you're connected with Chapel Hill Academy.
Great. I was a pediatrician for many, many years, 25 years here in the greater Minneapolis area, where I did a lot of behavioral pediatrics and a lot of teaching with residents and medical students from the U of M. And then turned 55 and decided to go full-time academics and got a position at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, where I was a professor for 7 years before retiring 3 years ago. We have 3 kids. Susan and I have been married 40 years this June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The 3 kids are all obviously grown up. 2 are married. Our youngest came here from 5th to 8th grade. And we love Chapel Hill. We spent a lot of time volunteering here when Luke was here, and he made some incredible friends, and many of them were in his wedding.
That's great.
And they're still very close, and so we have a special place in our heart for Chapel Hill.
Well, wonderful. We're so grateful that you're with us today. I would like to start off by asking the question that I've always wondered. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, my co-author, Michael Anderson, who is now retired but was a psychologist and parent coach for many years here in Minneapolis, we're very good friends, and we both noticed in our respective practices, him being a counselor and me being a pediatrician, that the parents of the kids that we were seeing were really stressed out. And there was a lot of things in culture that were pushing them to think certain ways about parenting. And we finally just said, let's put our heads together and do a big project that really unpacks parenting from a standpoint of thinking about it differently rather than writing something that's a how-to book. There's a lot of how-to parenting books out there.
They're sure.
And they tend to, Michael and I actually researched hundreds of those at Starbucks on Saturday mornings before we ever sat down and outlined our book, and realized that most of those were really looking at parenting through a single lens. And as you know, all of our kids are different, and something might work for one child, but it doesn't work for all kids. So we just wanted to write a book that really looked at the whole genre of parenting and thinking about how you raise your kids, thinking differently about how to do that.
And that's been such a great blessing to our families who have read this book. There are some wonderful strategies. One thing that I noticed about the approach is it really addresses something that's happened in the past 10 to 20 years, is that overprotectiveness that can really be limiting to a child. Is that something that you had seen in your practice working with families?
Absolutely. I think, 15, 20 years ago, we started to see the beginning of what we call safetyism. This hyper focus of parents on protecting their kids from any hardship or, pain. And that's really why we wrote the chapter on overparenting. And overprotection is just one of the 4 ways we can overparent our kids. And that was really a cultural thing. I think it had a lot of factors, including cable news. When there was a kidnapping or an abduction, obviously we heard about that 24/7 for many, many days. And it gave the false impression to parents that our world is more dangerous now than ever. And actually, statistically, that's not true. But we still see the ramifications of that, where kids aren't allowed play dates. They're not allowed to go out to the park kind of on their own when they're at an appropriate age, to just play with friends. And we've got the mentality is we as parents have to be there all the time because we don't want them to get hurt.
That's an interesting point, that statistically it's not more challenging or unsafe out there. I think we see so much more because of the media,
Exactly.
and that brings it to our attention more.
Right.
Do you feel
So we
like,
think it's really common, but
yes,
it's actually still pretty uncommon.
okay,
And so you
interesting.
have to, the hard part about being a parent is you have to weigh that, maybe that fear that may not be completely realistic with the importance of your child really growing up in a play-based childhood rather than a overly protected child.
I just want to read a couple of brief quotes that I think are so great from your book. First of all, he writes the book in 3 sections. We've got section 1, the foundational principles of life, then the core development, and then, which is the most interesting, the unintended parenting. And so I think that I often have gravitated to that area just to take a look at that. But one thing that I thought was very profound in your book is this: it starts with a child who is adored and protected, but it must give way over 20 years to a child who is free and equipped. And that's one thing that when I speak to parents who are interested in Christian education, they don't want to shield kids from the world. And so my answer is we prepare and equip rather than guard and protect. And that seems to align with your book as well.
Mhm. I think that is a really important thing to remember as parents is our love for our children and how we parent them and raise them and love them has to change over time so that they get to the point where they are not fully equipped. No one's fully equipped for adulthood,
Right.
but we see an entire generation who's very unequipped for adulthood in general. And so our thinking as parents has to be, that's going to be my focus is goal-driven, progress-driven, maturation-driven, rather than I still need to protect them all the time.
Right. And that's hard sometimes
Sure it
because
is.
there's a lot of concern about when you release, will they be okay?
Hmm.
And what if they're not?
Hmm.
And so if you have a parent asking you the question, what if something happens? How would you respond to that?
Great.
Okay,
That's life.
that's life.
And now let's
Yeah.
learn from that. Let's come alongside our child and help them learn the issue that they've just experienced.
Yeah.
And it can be a variety of things, from friendship betrayal to not making the varsity team, or you name
Getting a
it.
bad grade.
Yeah, it's like great. And instead of looking at this from a parenting perspective as, oh, this is a disaster, this will be traumatic to my, or whatever. It's like, no, this is great. This is a wonderful opportunity for them to learn about life. So let's engage in that, and that's going to help our child long term.
I like the fact that you said great because our response to kids really impacts how they think about things.
Sure,
So if we get all worked up, then they're going to. And
absolutely.
if you say, okay, great, let's learn from this. I have a teacher here at Chapel Hill who's known for, oh, good, you made a mistake. Let's figure this out together.
Yeah,
And so that's a wonderful way to help them feel positive about correcting behavior or situations that weren't very comfortable.
absolutely. So I think it's not fun as a parent to watch your child suffer or experience
Yeah.
anything that you would consider negative. But the truth is they need to,
Yeah.
they have to, because that whole concept of the checklist to adulthood is so important for kids to experience a variety of positive and negative things, even neutral things, so that they can enter into adulthood with, yeah, I remember when that happened to me.
Yeah.
And it gives them a much better perspective rather than being 23 years old and having the first experience with, something bad.
Right. And knowing they can get through something and see, oh, I grew from that or I overcame that.
Right.
And they can recognize that growth in themselves and gain confidence with that experience.
I don't think we learn very much at all when things are going well.
Right.
And our kids need to hear that, that when things are firing on all 8 cylinders and you've got great friends and you're on extracurricular activities, your grades are good, your family relationships are good, that's wonderful. And as parents, we should sit back and go, this is great.
Yeah.
Just don't say anything and just enjoy it. But when things fall off the rails, that's really a great opportunity.
When real learning occurs.
Exactly.
Yes. So there's another part I'd like to read, and then we'll get into some questions. I thought this was so fun. Adults, kids, pets, and livestock, and show animals all learn best when one simple environment exists, when they get a good outcome from a good or desired decision, and when they have a costly outcome from a bad or undesired decision. This is at the core of most learning.
Mhm.
Perhaps no other principle is as essential to understand in parenting. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it really has to do with what Mike and I coined as healthy learning and unhealthy learning.
Mm-hmm.
And like you just mentioned, if you make good decisions and you have a good outcome, that's a healthy way to learn. That I studied for my math test, I got a good grade. I shot 100 extra free throws at practice, and the next game you make 6 out of 7 instead of missing half. And you all of a sudden put together this connection between a good decision and preparation to a good outcome. Likewise, healthy learning can be when you make a bad decision and you have a bad outcome. And the problem is parents get in the way of the bad outcome many times, and the kids never learn from that. Or the parents bail them out and they end up with a good outcome for a bad decision.
Yes.
And that's very unhealthy learning. And the problem with unhealthy learning is you have to unlearn that before you can actually move forward. And so it really arrests the development of the child when they are in a situation with a lot of unhealthy learning about how life works, how relationship works.
And it's very well intended. Parents want to protect.
Absolutely.
And so the aim is to guard their emotions or their feelings, but actually that's not
That's
the
hindering them.
that's hindering.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's stealing them from maturing
Mhm.
in some ways. So it's really important to think about these negative, what you would consider negative things happening to your children as really great opportunities for them to learn. We learn through our failures. We don't learn through our successes,
Right.
you know.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know we have a lot of people here in our audience that have great questions. I'd like to open it up for them to fire away and see what we can learn more from you.
Okay.
So I wanted to get to the chapter about just shut up because I think a lot of us parents found that the most convicting of all the chapters, just that parents tend to talk too much, and maybe you could tie it in with your approach of the two things too,
Sure.
and how those tie together.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I'm guilty as charged. I was a parent who, especially with our first child, talked too much. I remember there were times where I would be lecturing our daughter. My wife would be behind her going, like, just shut up. And so actually, that kind of was one of the inspirations for that chapter when we wrote that. Parents do talk too much. And I think parenting is most effective when you only use words if they're necessary. It's okay to talk to your kids, but talk to them about their dreams and their hopes and their friends and their goals and those kinds of things rather than talk to them about their failures all the time. I used to tell parents, spend 90% of your words on positive conversations with your child. But it's usually the opposite. Usually it's only 10% of our words, right? And again, I'm one of those that used to do that as well. So I think as kids don't get barraged with lots of negatives all the time, they I think have a much better relationship with their parents. You still need to say the things that need to be said, but they can be said briefly and honestly and with compassion and kindness. Don't want to be too blunt. You don't want to be brash, harsh, or not connected with your child emotionally when you're talking to them.
Mhm.
So I think the talking too much really is a big deal. And one of the issues with talking too much is if you spend more than a minute or two talking about an issue that your child's failing at, it's going to morph into shame. It just automatically does, because the more you talk about the negative, the more they take that in, and all of a sudden their perspective of themselves changes to one of shame, rather than you're on my team just trying to help me grow and learn. So I think we have to really be careful about how much talking we do. When I do parenting talks and stuff, I talk about this concept of scripting. Have you heard of that before? Where we really, as parents, talk when we want to bring an issue to our children, we want to bring it to them in a concise and logical way that looks at the issue, looks at the consequence, looks at the expectation, and then gives them a positive, I'm on your side and I think you can do this kind of thing. And as we do that, we've got 3 or 4 sentences rather than 3 or 4 minutes. And it's very focused, and I tell parents, practice this before you sit down with your child and find that right time to talk about why they are missing their curfew all the time and what's the new thing that's going to be an expectation. So, and the second part of your question? The two things, right. We all have, I mean, our kids, we all have lists as long as our arms of things that they need to work on, don't they? But if you work on 20 things at a time, nothing will ever get done. And so for parents, it's important to think about what are the two most important things my child needs to learn about life, family, relationships, school, things like that. Responsibility, I hate that word, the big R. What are the two things that we really need to work on? And really focus on those two things. Get those mastered with your child so that you can move on to the next two things. And many times as you start working on those things, that those next two things, actually one of them is now off the table because they learned from this situation to apply it to this situation. But that intentionality, I think, is important for parents to just not get lost in the chaos of life, but say, you know, the mom and the dad should get together and say, okay, little Johnny, let's brainstorm a list of the things that we really need to start working on with him. And then let's focus down on two things. And now let's get Johnny involved in that. And it's powerful when a kid knows that they're not expecting to change 20 things. They just are working on two things. And my parents are rooting for me in this and want me to master these things. That's positive.
Yeah. Thank you. Good advice. Other questions? Yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I think you first wrote this book in 2013.
2014, yeah, it was published.
So 12 years later, and I know the group of us who got together to discuss the book, we wondered if you could add to it today with the current social media environment, which has exploded even more.
Yeah.
What would you maybe add or change to the book?
That's a really good question.
That's the same question I had, so good question.
Really good question. No, I think obviously the technology chapter, I mean, we did our first update 2 years into it because the technology chapter in 2014 was out of date. So we had to redo it in 2016. And then Focus took the book from us and we did a full second edit in 2018, I believe. I think obviously the technology chapter would need to be updated. I think there would be an important chapter on the issue of transgenderism because that has really been a big deal in our society for the last 10, 12 years or so. But not only that, just connecting that to the whole issue of social influence on media and the dangers of that. It's not just that issue. I think we would probably include a chapter on some of the newer movements that clearly seem to not have a lot of basis or effectiveness for them. We were talking earlier about the gentle parenting, and I think that's extremely well intended and a lot of positive intentions with that, but in practicality and day-to-day life, being your child's therapist is probably not a really good position for you to be in. So I think we'd probably bring in some of those newer parenting strategies that have been started by social media influencers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
Good question, though.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And I see that oftentimes too, just even working with classroom teachers and students. Students are looking for a strong guide. They're not looking for a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
They do much better when they have that structure. They know the expectations. They have positive feedback and encouragement with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an adult that they really respect and look up to rather than kind of a friend knowing how they can maybe get their way with different things. And
Right.
so I think that's
Yeah,
great
I
advice.
think the question you shouldn't start your day with, or you shouldn't start talking to your child when they get off the school bus is, how are you feeling today? Because it's amazing how many parents, that's their focus. How are you feeling? What are you feeling today? And instead, other questions I think are so much more important. And feelings are important. I'm not saying that they're not. But if it's the primary focus between the parent and the child's going to start to think that everything is based on my feelings. And as we know, it's hard to trust our feelings because sometimes they take us in the wrong directions. So I think taking that focus back off of primarily feelings and keeping that included, obviously, but not as the primary focus of our parenting strategy to our children.
What would a good question be instead of how are you feeling?
Well, I've got a couple of good questions here. that I thought about, what would we want to ask our kids when they get off the school bus? I think, what was the best part of your day? I mean, not hang your coat up and put your shoes away.
Mm.
Why didn't you hang up your coat? But what was the best part of your day? What mistake did you learn from today? Did you make a mistake at school or in your friendship, in your relationships? Who are you proud of today? These are questions that bring kids into a much more holistic look at life and their relationships that they have. Yeah, my friend who, one of the kids in the playground is being bullied, and my friend came to their side and took them under their wing and kind of helped them get through that. What's one thing that could have made your day better? Great question. Makes kids think much more about deeper issues. And then, who did you help today? I love that question. One of the things that both Michael and I used in our respective practices when kids had depression or anxiety, we would send them home on an assignment. And we would have them take a journal. And we would tell the child, one time each day, I want you to help one other person. It can be a family member. It can be holding the door open for a little old lady at Hy-Vee. It can be bringing your little brother into a game of Uno. It can, whatever that is. But I want you to then write those things down. And when kids who are really struggling with issues like depression or anxiety get out of themselves, instead, those are two things that are real, but they really promote ongoing and almost ratcheting up of self, just looking at your navel and how bad things are and how you feel so bad and things like that. And I'm not disregarding or minimizing depression or anxiety. But when a kid gets out of that and starts focusing outside of themselves onto somebody else and how they can make their lives better, it all of a sudden changes the child. And I remember kids would come back after 2 weeks just for follow-up, and I'd say, show me your journal. And they would pull that out. They were so proud of that. And they would go through each thing, and they knew the details of how they helped each person each of those days. Mm. And it just changed their life. And the parent would be going, different, isn't it? Yeah. And it was so simple, just giving them an assignment to do something kind to one other person once a day. So I think that's the kind of thinking we want.
Isn't it interesting how biblical principles work?
It is. It is.
So biblical.
Yes.
Yeah, to look at others.
Yeah.
And great advice to parents too. What would you do if your child's response was negative? I didn't have a good part of my day. Mm-hmm. Or I don't know, I didn't learn anything today. Like what's the next?
I would say, well, that's too bad, but maybe we can have a good part of your day tomorrow.
Yeah, just move on.
But I'll ask, but
don't dwell on
it. Yeah, just move on and say, well, maybe tomorrow you'll have a good part of your day.
Yeah.
Or a best part of your day. So
yeah. We all have bad days sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing to say to a child.
Yes.
Mom doesn't have good days all the time. Dad doesn't have good days all the time. Yeah. Some days are really hard at work and some days are really hard at home. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
That's okay.
That's life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, how about another question? Yes.
For those of us who have puberty-age daughters, do you have any advice for when feelings take over and logic just...
Yes. Let me repeat the question so that you can hear. So young adolescents going through puberty and emotions can be all over the place. Sure. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think the importance of being calm and just very straightforward and not get hooked into that. So they're in a reactive cycle because sometimes it's out of their control. Their emotions are all over the board with their hormones. But it's important for you to be that solid person in their life that just listens, but doesn't react, doesn't correct, just listens. Let them get that out and just then ask a different question. So how does that situation with your friends, how would you think that might go better tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And have them start to think deeper about that rather than just living in that
more solution
anxiety. Right, much more solution-minded. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that we have the completely formed frontal lobe, the logic center, And young ones don't have that. And so when their emotions are all over the place and they're not thinking logically, we get to be that logic for them and then help them see more clearly, that's not true. That's not that's not happening. Because sometimes they get lost in those feelings and thinking all kinds of things are happening that might not be reality.
Yeah. And I think the goal for parents when your kids are in adolescence is just to be that stable place that they can go and always be heard. I think if you think that way, I'm upset inside because of what I'm hearing. I'm talking as a parent, but I'm not going to show that to my child because I want to be the rock for my child. I want them to always look at me as someone that they can come to that will be even keeled and isn't going to react and get all upset. But if you're a person who reacts, you're going to have to learn a new way not to react, because reactive cycles are really tough when you get your buttons pushed, obviously. My wife and I work at Focus on the Family's Cave Creek, Arizona Marriage Retreat Center. So we're a host couple for marriages in crisis, many of whom are in the process of divorcing, and this is their last chance. One of the parts of that curriculum that I think is not only really important in marriages, but is important in a parent-child relationship is the whole issue of reactive cycles. So your child says something that pushes your button, you react emotionally, maybe because of something you've experienced in your life, even as a child, and then you react to that. That pushes your child's button. They react to that. And literally in a matter of seconds, you're in this thing and everybody's like, and all of a sudden, blow up. Someone stomps out, slams her door. You go into your room and you're like, I don't know what to do. And it's that kind of thing, recognizing when those things are happening so that you can diffuse it. And that's why I think being that stable, very rock solid person emotionally for your child when they're going through the inevitable puberty. And it's not just girls who go through the emotionality, speaking from personal experience, but our daughters probably are more responsible for my hair color than anything else. I remember those times, and I think it's important to be creative when you're in the midst of that. I'll give you a story that's actually in the book, but it was actually based on our own personal experience at our house. One of our daughters was just in that situation and just out of control and was getting, obviously angry at life and all of those things, and slammed her door one night, just kaboom. I mean, you could hear it through the whole house. And so the next afternoon she was in school, and I was off that day. And so I got out there with my little hammer and my thing, took the hinges off, and then took the door and put it in the utility area of the basement, and didn't say a thing. And she came home and obviously went haywire. She was not happy about that because teenagers love their privacy, don't they? They want to be able to close their doors. Well, there's no door. And so she blew a gasket and asked, how long, in not a very nice way, how long was her door going to be off? And I said, it depends on your behavior, but I think we'll start with 7 days. That's a long time to not have a door in your bedroom. So she stomped off, was all upset, and 7 days passed, and she was at school, put the door back on. She came back, and one time she got angry and slammed her door and quickly opened her door and said, no, I didn't mean to do that. And, she had learned her lesson. We didn't take her door off that time. Yeah. But, the whole issue of getting physical with things like doors and walls and furniture, that's not a healthy reaction, but we had to kind of go on the side door to get her to learn that. Okay.
That's great. So taking that a step further from just pushing buttons with a conversation or yelling at each other, a teenage boy, girl comes home after doing something they really shouldn't have done. Mm-hmm. It's hard for a lot of us not to have a reaction. Mm-hmm. So that steady, even keel response is as important then as it would be having just a conversation that didn't go right.
Absolutely. And I think using words like, well, let's look at what the consequence to this is going to be. And have them start to brainstorm with you. Okay, this happened. This is the consequence. And then, these things don't just happen after one experience. I mean, sometimes you got to go through these things with your kids a dozen times before it finally clicks and they go, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's your job, is to hang in there. And the perseverance and the patience you need as parents is unbelievable. But you have to do that because the ultimate goal, the ultimate outcome is what you want for your child, and not to get stuck in the muck of the day and of that particular conversation.
Yeah. I had a situation once where my daughter was out. She had a curfew, 11:30, and that's the expectation. And it was 11:35.
Mhm.
Instead of, oh, it's close enough, she came in. I said, how was your time? Oh, good, great. Well, you'll be in tomorrow.
Mhm.
What? You're late. But it was only 5 minutes. It was 5
It
minutes.
was late.
And so she was not late after that. 11:35 could bleed to 11:45, could bleed to midnight. That's the expectation.
Right.
And it wasn't a yelling match or issue. It was just, did you have a good time? Good, but you're home tomorrow.
Yeah. And it's even fine to add, and you're home tomorrow.
Yes.
Hey, maybe we can do a family game night.
Yeah.
It'll be nice to have you around.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
keep it
no,
positive.
seriously.
Yep.
Make that a positive.
Yep.
And they still know that, okay, I can't go out tomorrow night,
Yep.
but, mom still wants to be engaged with me. Dad still wants to be engaged with me. That's really positive. I mean, how does that child feel? They feel accepted and loved. Yes, they screwed up, and yes, there's a consequence to that, but they still feel engaged with mom and dad.
Yep.
So important to end things on that rather than a real negative, no, you blah, and all of a sudden your kid is reacting to that.
Or on the other side, being permissive, like, well, it's fine. It's 11:35.
Right.
Then that makes it later and later and later, and suddenly there's no boundaries.
Yeah. Well, and have your yes be yes and your no be no.
Exactly.
And I think inconsistency with parents is toxic to a child, because they just don't know which parent am I going to get today.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how they're going to react to that. And are they going to come down big time? Or are they going to be permissive? And then of course kids are like, well, if I do certain things, then they're more likely to be permissive. Kids are smart. And they know how to figure things out because it works for them. They know how to manipulate.
Let's talk about that just a bit, because inconsistency is confusing, but when you have multiple kids with different needs, and you might have different expectations or rules or things you allow for one child, which is in your book, to another, how do you navigate that with your kids saying the old word, it's not fair?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is kids are so different.
Yeah.
And some kids, you don't have to hardly parent at all. I mean, really, they're just on autopilot. They're actually functioning very well. And my goodness, sit back and just enjoy it. Just watch it and go, this is really nice, because, someday that's going to fall apart in different ways. And then there's some kids who are really high maintenance, and like almost all the time there's some issue that you have to be working on, and they never seem to hit that sweet spot. That's okay. That's how they're wired. And you have to step up your parenting. I always like the thought of the difficulty of each kid, the degree of difficulty, and it's kind of on a bell curve, I'll draw it out here real quick. So just like this. Can you see that? So all kids are in a different part of the bell curve. This would be an average difficulty child. This would be a really difficult child. This would be super easy kid. All right. And every kid is kind of on a different spot. And so we have to step up our game if we've got a kid like that. We need to sit back and enjoy it if we've got a kid like that. And as time goes on and as they grow, they can change into different spots on this bell curve. So a kid who is super easy as a 6-year-old might be a hellion as a 16-year-old. And that's okay, and that's normal, and you just have to be cognizant of that and make sure that you step up your game when you need to, and then enjoy when things are really going well. If a kid is thriving, you have to do very little parenting. You can just be in relationship with them and just enjoy it and savor it and remember it when things fall apart, because things invariably do.
What would your advice be to a parent that needs to explain that to their 3 different kids that have different expectations or different things that you're okay with?
Yeah, I think it's important to be very honest with each kid. And if one says, well, you're not doing this with them and you're doing it with me, you can say, well, that's because they don't do that. And you do. And so what we want you to do is change that part of your behavior. And then we're going to back off on that when you're thriving in that. Okay. And when, big sister so-and-so is having difficulty with things that you don't have difficulty with, we're going to be attending to those things with her. So we're not just isolating you out, but right now, this is what we're working on with you.
Yeah, what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. How about another question?
Yep.
You talk a lot about expecting exceptionalism out of our children and how it's actually okay to be average. So can you speak to the dangers of saying just do your best and overpraising our children?
Yeah, I think both Michael and I believe that, especially 20, 25 years ago, this whole issue of giftedness became a big issue. And schools bought into this too and would test all the kids in first grade and whether or not they're academically gifted, which, by the way, the research shows that if you're gifted in first grade doesn't mean anything that you're going to stay gifted in sixth grade. And so all these programs really have ended up pigeonholing kids into things. And the kids who are gifted at sixth grade, who aren't in the program in first grade, don't get in the program in most schools, even though they're maybe academically gifted. But I think the danger comes when you're talking to your child and you're saying you're gifted, or when teachers are talking to kids and saying you're gifted, because it just puts a lot of pressure on that child to remain gifted. Now, it might be fine to say, you really are good at math. But that's just one part of you. Okay? And as a parent, you can say, you're really smart, but there's also things with your behavior that we want to work on. And we're really glad that you do well in school. But that's not what we're going to talk about now, because these are the areas that you really need help in. So using words like gifted, exceptional, I think are dangerous for kids to hear all the time. And I remember parents would come in with our 2-year-old for a checkup, and I'd say, well, how are things going? And they'd say, oh, he is so gifted. And I would say, in what? He is 2. Well, he knows his numbers. Great. Wonderful. But that, and I did lightly and gently say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be gifted academically just because he knows his numbers. Because you can take an 18-month-old and get flashcards out and they can start to recognize numbers pretty easy, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be a savant in math. That just means that you're training them to do what you want them to do. So I think using gifted and exceptional is dangerous when kids hear that all the time, and that becomes their identity. I think telling a kid it's okay to be average is wonderful. One of the best things you can tell your kid, if they're average, okay? If they're below average, I wouldn't say that you're average. I would say, well, with more practice, you can probably get to be, like most of your classmates in basketball. So I'd be happy to come alongside you and work on that with you. But don't tell them that, they're going to be an NBA star when they are in third grade. Because that you can't predict those things. There's too many other factors. So when I give talks to parents, for example, I'll say, so how many of you are average? And, the arms go up like this, and I'd say, isn't that wonderful? You are average. Isn't that great? Nothing wrong with being average. And I think that's a great message for your kids too. Yes, you are average in math. You are a B- student, and that's okay. And with more study, you might get that up to a B or a B+. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second part of that question talked about just do your best. And I liked that part in your book because it is just kind of a arbitrary comment. It doesn't really help the student or child know what does that mean.
Yeah.
And so using more tangible, clear, specific examples of what you're hoping for them is really helpful. Same way it goes with just behave. What does that mean to a child? They don't understand what behave means.
Right.
So being more specific
it's
about
kind of too vague. Yeah.
Yes.
Do your best is really a conundrum for kids. Because it's like, well, what does that really mean? If I study 14 hours the night before a math test, is that doing my best? Well, maybe, maybe not. And I think kids just need to do what they're capable of doing within the context of the margins and boundaries and time that they have. Kids who are perfectionists, for example, typically are told to do their best a lot, and they don't understand the law of diminishing returns.
Mhm.
You know, they think they have to perform at this level, otherwise their self-worth isn't what they think it should be. And sometimes that's a message that they get either from their parents or others in their life. So, yeah, do your best is really a conundrum. It's how do I know what that really means? So,
And it can also lead to the opposite effect of, yeah, it was my best today.
right.
And
And they just slough off that and use that as an excuse for not really doing due diligence and preparation. Yeah. I think a better question rather than do your best is, will you be prepared?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and that brings into an issue that I think is so important for parents to relay to their kids, is that effort is critically important for your kids to learn. Effort is much more important than talent. It's much more important than intelligence. It's much more important than popularity. Effort is everything. And so give that message to your child. I just want you to try very hard at what you're trying to accomplish here. So reward effort at all costs. And don't focus on the talent and the exceptionality and the perfection.
Great. Thank you. Other questions?
Another one on
Great.
the group. It's such a good book. I mean, I've read it
You,
3 times.
you
so-
have such good questions.
You had a whole chapter on the difference between joy and fun, and I was wondering if you could kind of.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that one up.
We probably
The
had-
difference between joy and fun. Let's fire away. Here we go.
Yeah, I think that's really important for kids to learn that as they grow up, because too much of our focus in our culture is on fun. And thinking that having a lot of fun is going to make us happy, and that's just not true. Fun is fine, nothing wrong with fun, but it shouldn't be our focus. And instead, I think helping our kids looking at what they do, how they help people, how they view the world, and those things are going to give them joy and that real internal satisfaction. Whereas fun is just a fleeting kind of, it's over. You know, this is a great movie, but 15 minutes after the movie, you're kind of like forgetting about it. Disney World is fine and roller coasters are fun, but after you're done, the fun is over. And so that's not there. But joy is a different thing. Being in a great relationship with your grandfather who is dying of cancer, and you get to be at his bedside and talk to him as he kind of dwindles away, that will bring the child great joy. It will be hard, it's difficult, but they're going to remember that, and they're going to have such fond memories about me and Grandpa and our conversations before he died. So there's just a completely different echelon between joy and fun. Joy is long-lasting. It's deep in our soul. We feel that. Fun is up here. It's like, ooh, that was really, really great. But joy is a heart issue. And I think we want to make sure our kids have a lot of opportunity to experience joy. And those tend to be in relationships.
I think for me, the fun is the more entertainment. It comes more of a taking, where joy is inside and it's a giving.
Yeah.
And so that's a beautiful contrast, I think, to focus on joy. What gave you joy today at school?
Yeah,
Joy to
great
you?
question. We should add that to these questions. What gave you great joy today?
Yeah. And then if there's a response of, I don't know, well, let's try to think about that. Just keep.
Yeah, tell me about what happened
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
How
Good.
did things go with your friends today? How
Yeah.
did things go with your teachers? Any of those things you feel gave you a little joy?
Yeah. Wonderful.
Just probe.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Any further questions? All right. I have a few, of course.
Okay.
If a parent is feeling like, oh, I should have read this book years ago, I feel like I'm too far down the road, it's too late. Is there still hope for parents that need to or want to change some things and maybe try some of these strategies and ideas that you put in your book?
Yeah, I think these are very eternal kinds of concepts as far as thinking about parenting, and they apply just as much to kids who are adults. Um, my wife and I use a lot of these concepts, and our kids are 30, 34, and 37. And, you know, and then we use them a lot with our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not too late. And I think the good news is you can be in a place that doesn't feel very comfortable, but you can reverse that. You can start to work on things in your relationship with your even adult children and change things. One of the things that bothers me about our current society is the estrangement rates between adult children and their parents. Incredibly high. I think the last research that I was reading, 27%. So 1 out of 4 adult children is estranged from their parent. That's just heartbreaking to me. That in this key time of their life, in a young adulthood, they don't have that relationship with their parent. And sometimes it was instituted by the parent, and sometimes it's instituted by the adult child. There's a movement of deconstruction of your family going on, not only your faith and your religion, but it's morphed into deconstructing your family. So you hear stories about adult children who just can walk away from their family, that you've done it wrong and you've parented me terribly, and I've been permanently traumatized from that, and now I got to walk away from you because you're toxic to me. I mean, you hear this kind of verbiage all the time, and it just breaks my heart to think about kids that are estranged from their parents. Those are parents that love their kids. There's parents that could be great resources for the grandchildren. All those things that are missing out because of pride, essentially. I think that's, you know, the bottom line. So it's never too late to reconcile your relationship, and it's always important to, as your kids get older and you get older and they're grown up, if they start to move away in that way, I would step in right away and say, wait a minute, I love you. I want to be in a relationship with you. Let's talk about what you're perceiving as a big problem in our relationship, and let's work through that together.
Is there a route for that? What can parents do today that maybe would help protect that from not happening?
I think growing them up in kind of what we've been talking about and being that stable rock for them, you're the one that they always know is going to have an even keel, and they're going to look at things practically. They're going to understand the emotions, but not let that dominate their thinking. When your kid looks at you that way, they will come to you. And one of the greatest things that my wife and I experience now with our grandchildren is when our daughter and son-in-law approach us and say, how would you handle this situation? Because it's like, oh, thank you for asking. And you get to, because when your kids are adults, you got to have duct tape over your mouth. You just don't say anything. And you wait for them to solicit wisdom and insight from you. But that's a wonderful part about
And I
what we're
think that's an
experiencing now.
important point, because sometimes overparenting adult kids, inserting oneself into their family, can cause some of that
Yeah.
detachment.
Yep.
Too.
And
So
I-
be
I-
careful of that.
And I think even saying that out loud to your adult child with your grandchildren, not with them present necessarily, but say, you know, if you ever want to ask me a question that you might be struggling with your child, we're available. But we're not going to be asking you or inserting ourselves or telling you you can't do this when you don't want us to even have that opinion yet.
Yes.
But we are open to discussing it with you.
I've set
And-
up this long-standing comment to my kids, and I've told a few people here, I've got the 3T approach. Take, toss, or tweak. You can take my advice, you can toss it, or you can tweak it. But I always preface my thoughts if they ask me a question. Okay, here's my 3T answer. And so that gives freedom to know what they can do with that information.
No, that's a really good strategy. I like that.
Right. We've got a PowerPoint here. It's a checklist to adulthood. Adulthood is built from a myriad of good, bad, pleasant, humbling, exhilarating, and miserable experiences. Caution, overprotecting is stealing their checklist.
Yeah. I think the checklist to adulthood is a very powerful concept because it helps us as parents know that our kids must experience pain to grow. And if they don't experience pain, if we're preventing them from experiencing pain, they will not grow in certain ways that will be very important in their lives. And so it's wonderful to have the best Christmas ever, but it's also wonderful to not be invited to a birthday party.
Yes.
It is. As an adult, if you don't understand betrayal, if you haven't experienced being left out, it's going to really hinder your ability to be an adult, because that will happen when you're an adult. And all of a sudden, this big collision with life happens as an adult when you could have experienced this a few times during childhood. That helps buffer that experience as an adult. So as parents, we have to really be careful of looking at an event as something that is something we have to help our children avoid. No, we want them to experience that. And that includes, it's okay to go climb in that tree. But don't say to them, but if you fall down, you'll break your arm. No, just, yeah, go enjoy climbing that tree, knowing full well that they may fall down and break their arm. That will be a lifetime memory.
Mm-hmm.
They will. And it will be something you can talk about for years.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even say, as they get older, I felt it was really important for you to have some free play and to experiment with things like climbing trees. And we're really happy you did that. And yeah, I bet that breaking of your arm hurt, but it was part of your life and a great experience.
That's great. All right. Any other questions before we end our time together? Oh, you continue on with
Well,
your.
no, if you want me to.
Please go for it.
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff, so I could talk for
We
hours.
love it.
But just the whole issue of overparenting, it really is too much work. And, indulgence and affirmation, involvement, protection, those are all important strategies as parents. But when we talk about overparenting, we're talking about way over the top, overindulging over the top, bailing your kid out on every single level. Over affirmation, telling your kid, affirmation is wonderful, but only if it's truthful. Okay, and too many times we as parents over-affirm our kids. And it's not based in reality, it's based in our hope for their outcome. Does this make sense? Yeah. And so we need to step out of that, and our outcome for our children is not necessarily God's outcome for our children. And so affirming them and trying to make them become somebody that they really aren't is really damaging to your child. Being involved, I think, is really important, but being involved in every minutiae part of your child's life is oppressive. And as they get older, they will become very resentful of that. And they will break away from you. I've known young kids, they graduate from college or graduate from high school, and they're like, I'm never going home again. Every single part and aspect of my life has been micromanaged by my dad and my mom. And that's sad when I hear that, but it's true. And so it's really important not to be over-involved. So for example, some parents think they have to go to every single soccer game that their daughter plays. No, go to 2 out of 3. And then when they come home from the one that you weren't at, ask them, how did the game go? Because you haven't seen it, and you can now hear about it through the lens of what they experienced. But if you go to every single game, your lens is what you experienced in the game and what you watched. And so it's just missing this great opportunity for your child to offer to you their experience. So over-involvement is tough, and of course overprotection is damaging as well. Those kids really, they don't know how to solve problems. They don't know how to handle life when the collision happens. Okay.
Very good. One of the things I think about when you allow kids to feel those uncomfortable feelings, the hurt, it helps them rely on their Savior. It helps them grow in their faith. If they're not allowed to have a need to pray and to ask and to seek God, their spirituality will also be hindered.
Yeah. Well, and I love just the thought of the bigger narrative. There's a bigger narrative going on, Johnny, in your life right now. And the bigger narrative is this world and God and how He's made you and what you will do in your life and how you will serve Him. It's not about just this little moment today of selfishness.
Yes.
And so look at the bigger picture of your life and how that's going to play out rather than just getting stuck in the moment.
Yeah,
I mean, it's fine to experience the moment,
Mhm.
and it's important to be in the moment, but there's a bigger narrative going on. And we know the end of the story. This life does stink sometimes. A lot of times it is really hard. But we know that at the end of this story, we know how that's going to be. And we know where we're going to be. And we know just to have a little glimpse of how that's going to feel and look to us. Our kids need to hear that.
Mhm.
Is that there's a bigger picture. This life is a one-time deal. You've been blessed to be in our family. God has made you a certain way, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I can't wait to watch this play out over the next several decades. But the end of the story is someday all of the difficulty and hardship and tears, those are all things will be gone.
Mhm.
And we will, for all eternity, just be able to worship and be together in fellowship. What a great thing. And it helps me get through my day-to-day all the time, is just to know that is all coming. And I can have hope in that and anticipate it. And when it does, it'll be amazing.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So this whole book really resonates that biblical worldview because it's how God intended parenting, working with kids, helping them grow and develop, correcting them when they're off track. How did your faith in God lead you through this process of putting this whole beautiful book together?
Yeah. I'll speak for myself. I think Proverbs 22:6
Mhm.
was probably the key verse for me as I looked at writing this book with Michael. And that is, train up your child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. The caveat, the biggest caveat in that scripture is, and when they are old, right? Because we all know darn well that our kids, we can train them up as they grow in childhood, but for many kids, they will take that training and chuck it for a period of time as they get to be teenagers or young adults. And we have to have the faith of God's promise that when they are old, they will come back to it. And we have certainly experienced that in our lives, not with all of our kids, but with some of them. And we hear about it from friends all the time. You know, we were parents that trained them up, and they were in church all the time. They went to Christian school. And well, keep in mind, you don't control the outcome of your child. They ultimately have free will that they can decide what to take from their childhood and how you've parented them and take that into their adulthood. And for many kids, they will jettison all of that or some of that. And it just hits you right here when that happens. It's like, oh no, they're falling away or whatever. But trust in God's ability to bring them back, because they've got the foundations that you've given them. And yes, they may have a period of time where they wander, but boy, when they come back, I mean, I won't talk about it anymore because I'll start to cry, but when they come back, it's incredible.
That's why the book, The Power of the Praying Mom of Teens, was written, I
Yes.
think. That was a gift to me.
Yep.
And I think it's probably more true than not true, is there are those times when your kids grow up and they're in that young adulthood and they're trying to figure out life and who they are and making some decisions that for the first time maybe are all on their own.
Mhm.
And maybe you wouldn't want them to make those decisions, but eventually they come back.
Yep.
You
Well, and
pray.
a lot of young adults, they
Yeah.
enter the workforce. They're busy. They have a lot on their plate. And spirituality and going to church and being in a fellowship, that kind of, they don't have the margin to do that. They don't think they have the margin to do that, and so they don't do it. And then they just slowly morph, kind of, that becomes less and less influential for them. But do know that when they come back, it is really a great thing.
Thank you so much,
Sure.
Tim, for being with us. Really appreciate your heart for kids and families. Most importantly, your clear heart for God. That's really woven through all of what you share with us. So thank you so much.
You're very
I'm
welcome.
really blessed. Well, what a great conversation that was with Dr. Tim Johanson, visiting us all the way from Arizona, and we had a live audience. I'd like to really encourage each of you to consider the book Gist, The Essence of Raising Life-Ready Kids, for any parent at any point of your parenting journey. You could also submit questions below, and remember to like and subscribe this podcast. It really helps us reach more people for Jesus. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.